te jnana jnaninas tattvadarsanaha. Om shantihi, shantihi, shantihi. The sincere and qualified student approaches the illumined teacher via prostration, via service, and with deep questioning about the nature of reality. Then the illumined soul initiates him into the highest truth. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu, Ma Vidveshovahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. The SRV associations here on the big island of Hawaii welcomes you all to this first in a series of classes on the Bhagavad Gita. We always want to take a look at the Gita. It really is a scripture for everyday life. It's one of those universal scriptures with that strand of non-duality running through it, but with all these practical teachings which Krishna hands out, and hands them out to a very disgruntled and weakened Arjuna on the battlefield at Kurukshetra, which is now a historical battlefield. They've actually discovered it, unearthed it, and they're doing some diggings there. So it begins to lend a little bit more historical and geographical validity to this scripture, which has this powerful avatar who, appearing on the battlefield with Arjuna, is giving out this truth in a very short amount of time. In the old days in battles, not like today, you used to take breaks, and then maybe you'd even have some beverage with your enemy. See, well, they put the war aside, as if everyone knew the war was just immaterial, and they were looking for the outcome. Then they'd get back together in battle, in earnest, and so forth. So in this particular battle on the Kurukshetra field, the Pandavas and the Kauravas are coming together, these two families, one very dharmic and one very adharmic, unfortunately, which is much like the world, and its mixture of good and bad and mixed. And you know, the setup of the Bhagavad Gita is such that the Pandava brothers, 5 of them, it's a nice number in India, is you have 5 senses and 5 elements, and we were even talking about the 5 sacrifices before we joined you. In fact, you're joining us a little late, but we were late, so those live stream audience watching, please pay no never mind. There was technical difficulties, and I hope you all continue to stay with us until this class began to air. So, technical difficulties or difficulties with your neighbors, as the case was in the battlefield there. The Pandavas have been called back out of their forest where they were sent into exile, and it's time for them to take over their kingdom again, which was the agreement with the Kaurava clan. But the Kaurava clan has gotten used over 7 years to being lords over everything and owning and controlling everything, and that's of course the asuric nature. It's a Sanskrit word. There's suras and there's asuras, and the suras are the gods and so forth, and the asuras are the demigods, sometimes even the demons, if you will. So with this clash going on, Pandavas find that they're not going to get their lands and properties back as they were promised after their period of exile. So then this, of course, is an impasse, and these two armies begin to mount on either side. And it's a very interesting the way it happens, the way the cookie crumbles, as they say. It's because there are some very dharmic people in the adharmic army, and there are some very adharmic people in the dharmic army. So we know that's the case too nowadays with people who like to go to war and kill, and other people who would prefer not to but feel it's their duty to do so. So there are many references to modern times in the scripture like this. In fact, if you look at Quran, you look at the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, you look at a Bible with the Romans and so forth, all these scriptures are pretty much associated with or happen in the context of war. Muhammad had invading armies on 3 sides of his country when the Quran was being formulated. So that's why it's filled with a lot of references to war. War and peace, one of those dualities which we have to ponder. And in this world, you have to accept that it's this admixture is going to prevail, and you have periods of peace and pockets of peace, and then you have wars that come back and forth. It goes, and that's really a lesson for us. We know that in the mind-only schools of India, that everything has come from the mind. And we've been studying that for years in SRV, that the mind is a projector, and through different vibratory fields, from causal to subtle to gross, projects everything, even finally out to the very object itself, as a thought congealed. So, as Holy Mother used to tell us, this thought is objects are just thought concretized. So that's a clue for you to start dissolving them. Dissolution of the mind stream is a powerful meditation that's done in Buddhism and in Hinduism and Vedanta, of course, and yoga. So this being the case, then we see that war and peace are here to stay in this world. And we also know that the gods and the asuras and the suras in the scriptures in other worlds are also warring for these inner lands, for these inner kingdoms within. And so that being the case, until form is transcended in non-dual samadhi, you're probably going to find these altercations going on all the time in different beings of different realms. We're not talking about just different lands, but different realms inside. So it's no different than throughout history. And of course, Sri Krishna is a very ancient avatar. It goes way back in India's history. And we find that these altercations that happen, as far as he's concerned, are, Vedantically speaking, unreal or insubstantial. That is, ephemeral and passing all the time. And the avatar will use these, Divine Mother will use these in the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam, these times of war and so forth, to get people's attention, you might say. People are really focused at that time of war, and they're challenged, and there are trials going on. There are austerities that have to be undergone in war, deprivations and so forth. So that's a good time for the Lord to manifest, or the Mother to manifest in a form, and to take the opportunity to school people on transcendental truths and divine reality. So the whole thing is set up, you might say, on purpose for that kind of a message to be delivered, and people are ready for it at that time. So that's the case definitely with the Bhagavad Gita, and it's been discussed and discoursed on for centuries, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. You can find your own copy of your own Gita, and usually there's a good introduction in every copy of the Gita, and you can read that introduction and get these symbologies. Like, how did Krishna end up being the charioteer in the army? That's because the Lord is not active, the Lord is inactive. So when Krishna appears as the charioteer, unarmed, driving Arjuna's chariot, it signifies that the Lord is inactive and doesn't get involved in dualities like war and peace and hatred and love and so forth. These are dualities that he or she is always transcendent of. Non-participatory, you see, they're just a witness, as witness consciousness, that's the teaching. But still, Krishna has ended up on the dharmic side, you'll notice, with the Pandava brothers who are all righteous, all 5 of them. In fact, the oldest brother, Yudhishthira, is the most righteous being living at the time. Arjuna is very righteous, but he's still young, spiritually speaking. And that's why the message is being given to him instead of Yudhishthira, because Yudhishthira knows all this dharma already. But Arjuna needs to receive it, and you'll receive it straight from the lips of an avatar, which is the horse's mouth, or maybe in India you'd say the cow's mouth. So in that regard, Krishna ends up as the charioteer of Arjuna, but there's a story behind that, kind of might kick off this initial chart that I want to use for this whole 5-series class called the 32 Points of the Immortal Dharma. There's a story where Krishna has already been on the scene to try and mediate this war, and he's not going to succeed, he feels. So he retires back to Dwarka. So that's it. He's got his own kingdom, you see. And so he leaves them to work this out, hopefully to solve this problem. But then the war escalates and the armies expand, and it seems imminent that the war is going to happen. So he comes back to the scene of Kurukshetra, and he arranges a meeting with Duryodhana and Arjuna, one of the brothers of both families, you see. So he comes in and he lies down on a bed, you see, and sets a meeting, puts a bed there, and puts a chair at his head, and then one chair, and then lays down on his bed and waits for the 2 to come. In other words, he feigns sleep. He's setting up a ruse. So Arjuna arrives early and sees the Lord sleeping, Sri Krishna sleeping there, and sees the chair, and decides to stand at the feet of the Lord until he wakes up. Very humble and very reverent of Sri Krishna. He doesn't quite know who Sri Krishna is yet. He'll find that out in chapter 12, Vishvarupa Darshanam, when the Lord touches him and shows this many-armed form. Vishvarupa Darshanam it's called. But he knows Krishna is special, and he also knows that he's his friend. So he stands at the feet of the Lord, waiting for the Lord to wake up. Meanwhile, Duryodhana, this very egotistic and rather evil brother of the Kaurava clan, comes into the room and sees the chair and immediately occupies it. And behind Krishna's head, you see. So Krishna then wakes from his feigned sleep and sees Arjuna standing there, and starts to converse with him about the imminent war. So with this happening, then he all of a sudden becomes aware that Duryodhana is behind him. Maybe Duryodhana clears his throat or something. And so the Lord sits up, and sees that they're both there, and then the negotiations begin. And so Krishna says, I've come here since the war is non-negotiable, as it were, to offer myself and my armies. He's got his own kingdom. Dwarka is very powerful. He's got big armies and so forth. Armies there were elephants and chariots and all sorts of things. Armies of men and so forth. So he says, one of you will get my armies and one of you will get me. You can take your pick. So he says, since I saw you first, Arjuna, I opened my eyes from sleep and you were there, you pick. So Arjuna says, I pick you, Lord. And Duryodhana heaves a sigh of relief, and he knows he's going to get the armies, you see, of Krishna. So he's very happy. Everyone's happy. See. But the whole story is rather symbolic of that asuric and suric nature in people. If you give yourself to the Lord fully, self-surrender and so forth, then everything, you're going to get eternal life, basically, as Christ was telling his apostles in the midst of the whole problem with the Jews and the Romans, you see. Neither one of the Jews or the Romans didn't like Jesus. So he was caught in between a rock and a hard place, just like Arjuna is. Krishna too. So, but those who choose armies and war and fighting and matter and mechanisms and so forth, they're going to die with them. They're going to pass with them in rounds of birth and death, as Krishna is going to explain to Sri Krishna in the Gita. The Gita is a real hands-on scripture, philosophically speaking. That is, there are scriptures in India that are rather abstruse and hard to fathom, and some that are very Advaitic and non-dual that absolutely need a teacher to be understood, comprehended right. But the Gita is one of those that really lends itself to people of all levels. And I remember my first reading of the Gita was at 19, and it was just a little tiny pocket Gita by Sir Edwin Arnold called the Song Celestial. It wasn't even by an Indian Hindu man or a Hindu commentator. And it was beautifully put, the way sort of poetically put by this Englishman who appreciated it. So I read that first, and then a couple of years later I got a more authentic and fatter version, and then one with commentaries. So I read it over my period of some 45 years now that I've been familiar with it in this lifetime, and I've read it many, many times, and now I'm actually giving classes on it, as this class illustrates. So, of course, we only have 5 class series here, so for the next month or so, 5 weeks, we will be every Sunday taking up a part of the Gita. So in my study of the Gita in the past, I've created some dozen or more charts, these little storyboards or charts that help give us a visual to fashion onto too, rather than just sitting and listening to a discourse on it. It gives you something to lay your eyes upon, and so you can put sound and light together. You see, sound and light are 2 very powerful mechanisms for us, and we need to use them in not just in a material sense, but we need to use them to light our way inwardly. God speeds you in crossing over to the farthest shore beyond all darkness. See, as the Upanishads put it. So you need an inner light for that, to light up this inner path. Then you need to sharpen your ears and listen to the message of these great teachers. And that's what we'll be doing here. Now, I've taught the Gita many times over many years and approached it from different ways. When I considered this 5 class series, I thought we'll take one of these charts that is more complex than the others, and we'll use that as our main chart. And from there, we'll attach other teachings to it and go through some of these points of the 32 of these points of the immortal Dharma. And this is actually, you see this image here of Sri Krishna teaching driving the chariot of Arjuna, and of course there's a lot of symbology to that. It's usually drawn by sometimes 5 horses. You see, sometimes if you see 4 horses, then it probably symbolizes the 4 yogas, but quite often it's driven by, pulled by 5 horses, which means the 5 senses. The chariot's the mind, the reins are the prana, and the charioteer, Sri Krishna, is the Lord, and you're the mind-ego complex, who, with your bow and arrow, fighting this battle on the world, the battlefield of relativity, you might say. So that whole chariot scene, which is very big to Indians, as you know, goes way, way back, is very symbolic and has held its place even into modern times as a great symbol for the body-mind mechanism, or the psychophysical being, and how to control it. Of course, if any one of those 5 horses gets the upper hand or gets its own way, then the whole chariot will fall out of equilibrium and will go to its ruin. So the reins of prana have to be used by the mind, which is you, given to the Lord, who's actually the driver, and then that's even all attached to this outer battlefield, which is 5 elements, right? So you have the 5 senses, the 5 elements, and the 5-fold mind, if you count the Lord, cosmic mind, as a part of the package. So you've got many of the 24 cosmic principles of Samkhya Yoga represented right there in the symbol of the chariot. So we will use this to look into our next 5 classes, and we'll go through this. I've taken each of these 32 points, and there's different charts that I'll show you that will explain them better. I put both the Sanskrit in brief and the English too, if you want to come up and look at the charts. And the live streaming audience will be able to see these up close. But as an intro to this, I wanted to show you the Fourfold Presence chart first, and other Gita teachings that are on it, to kind of set us up philosophically. And you see the beautiful image there that I found is the soul, which is this maiden, or she'll be the soul, and then Ishvara is Krishna riding in the sky on Garuda. Garuda is the prana, or the energy by which things move and get animated. And you see the ocean of existence down here, representing, of course, relativity and all the changes that go with it. And all of this springs from a question that Arjuna asks of Sri Krishna on the battlefield. So the armies are separated, there's this pause, this very pregnant pause, and Arjuna has become weak and dropped his sword, and he sees some of his relatives are on the other side of the army, and he has to go and battle with them, kill them. That's his duty as a warrior. So he's in a very difficult conundrum there, and Krishna has to try and inspire him. So you see, through the 18 chapters of the Gita, they're all called yogas. You see, each of the chapters is named after a yoga. So the first one is Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Vishada means depression, basically. So this is the yoga, this first chapter is the yoga of Arjuna's depression. So depression can be a yoga too. You can be in union with depression. Does anyone want to argue with that? And if you've grown up in the West, you know how that is, maybe even when you're young. And as you try and tame the gunas and get your mind balance and so forth, and deal with the world and all its problems, and upbringing and parentage and politics and on and on. Maya, the 4-letter word. So, second chapter then goes into what's called Samkhya Yoga, which is an enumeration of various principles. And then it starts to proceed like that. And first you divide the 3 chapters into 6. 6 chapters of knowledge, and 6 chapters of devotion, and 6 chapters about service and so forth. So in this case, you can begin to look at Sri Krishna's very masterful way of lifting a soul out of depression. There's one of the elements of the Gita right there. It's a message for all of us how we can keep our mind balanced, and if we've fallen from that balance, how to restore it again and again, how to lift ourselves up. And Krishna does it in very convincing ways, so it's one of the elements of the Gita that's very important. So as Arjuna starts to be pulled up out of his depression by Sri Krishna's constant stating of the Dharma, teaching the Dharma, and handing out of this precious truth, which probably most of the other people on the battlefield have not heard, maybe you're not even ready to hear yet. This is the perfect time to do it, you see. So one of the questions that comes up in this exchange between them is what is Adiyatma? What is Adidaivaka? What is Adiyagya? And that's where this chart comes, you see. And what is Adibhuta, the fivefold nature of Prakriti. So when I saw this image, I thought this was a good way to illustrate that question and its answer both. So you might say philosophically the Gita has this underpinning of, philosophically speaking, of this fourfold presence of God. Now, we know if we've taken any kind of Advaitic teachings and so forth that there's this ideal that we hold that God is in everything. And it's Advaitic, and it's there in other darshanas of India too. Yoga holds it, and Buddhism holds it. Certainly Zen Buddhism holds it. And Advaita Vedanta is its keynote. So this idea of the presence of the Lord in everything becomes very well defined in Vedanta. See, because basically the teachings are given simultaneously that the Lord, God, consciousness, awareness cannot be a form. It's always a formless reality, transcendent of everything. So you have that on one side. On the other side, you have the five elements and matter and your body and your senses and the objects and countries and people and their egos and their different. You have lower knowledge that's supporting all of this too. It's called aparavid. But the paravid remains always veiled, like reality itself, behind Maya, behind the veiling power and behind the distorting power of Maya. And you need to in some way find this revelatory power called Prakasha Shakti. You kind of come to know eventually that one of the main teachings in Vedanta you hear right away is false superimposition, that everything has become veiled. Everything is veiled. So what you're seeing is not reality. What the senses experience is not reality because they're tuned in such a limited way that you can't possibly get even understanding of an object through the senses. You'd have to invent some electron microscope to know what an object consists of. So the senses can't even look at matter and see the truth. So you'd have to begin to try and penetrate through that. The yogis want you to penetrate through appearances. Vivarta, false superimposition, they call it, or adhyasa, things that are veiled or things that are only reflections of reality. But so you begin to take wooden nickels, you see, as they say. The real thing gets veiled and you're not ever seeing the truth. So this is a kind of initial teaching in Vedanta, the problem of false superimposition. Then you have to develop this power to penetrate through. You have to, they say, take your intellect and sharpen it and use it like a goad and penetrate through, like a spear or an arrow, to the truth of the matter. And if you don't do this, incrustations are always accumulating. It's not like, I can do that later, because people use that a lot, that sort of compromise or complacency. They use that a lot. Say, well, I'll satisfy myself in the world first and then I'll get God later. But as they satisfy themselves in the world, they find out God is the most precious thing, but God becomes further and further away from their sensibilities and from their awareness, and pretty soon Maya has replaced God and is the usurper, you see, and now you're serving the ego in yourself and in people instead of serving this egoless transcendental truth or reality, pure conscious awareness. So incrustations form like around that kind of hindsight and blind sight, see. And basically then karmas form, and then samskaras form, mental impressions, and finally rounds of birth and death are happening in cycles. Buddha called the Kala Chakra. And then pretty soon you find yourself in a position like Arjuna, you see, on a battlefield fighting his own relatives. I mean, what kind of strange situation is that to come up out of nowhere? And his own teacher, who taught him how to be this fantastic warrior, is on the other side too. He's going to have to encounter him. So the way that Krishna would explain a question like Arjuna's is illustrated very simply in a chart like this. He says, what is Adi Yagya, what is Adi Daivata, what is Adi Yagya, what is Adi Yatma, and what is Adi Bhuta? So Adi means the first and foremost. You might say in English, the original. Adi is a very powerful Sanskrit syllable. If you put it in front of any other word, it means the original, like the original form or the original sacrifice or the so forth and so on. The original soul, Adi Purusha, you sometimes hear that in regard to Sri Krishna. He's the Adi Purusha. He's the original archetypical soul of souls. He was the firstborn. He was the first on the scene, and everything then flowed out of him, out of Ishvara, or out of the Trinity, if you wish. So Arjuna, then, it shows that though he has fallen into this predicament, he's a very astute being. He's no slouch, even in philosophy. So he asks this very profound question: what are these four things? Can you explain them to me? Because I've heard of them before. So this image, as I say, became a very good image for illustrating these. You see, Advaita is the soul, the original soul. That's you. That's Atman. You see, and so this figure becomes symbolic of that. And offering a garland there, you see, is waiting to offer a garland to the Lord. If the Lord will simply come, pray to the Lord and the Lord will come, kind of idea. And so she, the soul, is called Krishna the only male, and all other souls are females. That's how they would explain that in Vaishnavism. So all these souls are courting this one God, this one supreme being, Adi Purusha. And there you see her offering this and waiting patiently. See, so she's the Adi Daivaka. That's you. That's your Atman. But also inside of that is your aspiration. You see, to realize that, because most people don't know they're the Atman. Few people have even heard that they're the Atman. Like Sri Ramakrishna used to say, some people have heard of milk and never had a taste of it, you see, and other people have never even heard of milk. Some people have heard of it and even tasted it, and some people own a dairy, you see, like the great souls. So using that analogy of milk, it's the same with God. Some people, their true self, they've heard of their true self, but they haven't really realized it yet, and other people have not even heard about it yet, and some have realized it. So this is teaching all around this, the presence of the Atman, or if you want to call it Buddha nature. That is your true nature, and won't be existing in Maya. You'll never see it in Maya. Like John said, repeated Christ's teachings, no man hath ever seen the Lord. Never seen the Lord. So John had that spot on philosophically. I must have heard that from Jesus. In other words, everything you see here is Maya. Everything you see here is form, and God is formless. Well, due to the need of human beings who want to realize their true nature, the Lord comes into us in a body. Now this is rather specific to Christianity and Hinduism. All the other religions doesn't happen. See, a prophet might come, say in Islam or something, and so forth, and there might be Buddha's coming and so forth, Buddha fields and so forth, but when the Lord actually takes a form and becomes that form, identifies with it, that's called an avatar or an incarnation, and that's really specific to two religions, Christianity and Hinduism. However, in Christianity, only once did it ever happen. There's only one Son of God, and he only came once, and they're still waiting for him 2,000 years later to come a second time, the second coming and all. So that's a long time to wait for her to wait, standing there with a garland. See, it might not be so fresh when he comes. In Hinduism, though, you have this much more universal idea that the Lord comes age to age, and these are actually words in the Gita. Yuge cha dharmasya. I come to teach the Dharma from age to age, from yuga to yuga. I would say that yuga, is up to interpretation, but when you look at our history for the past, say, 2,500 years, let's go back to Buddha, because that's at least historically sound. I mean, until Kurukshetra was unearthed, the battlefield, people were thinking maybe Krishna wasn't a historical figure, because he's so ancient. So you get these figures that are so ancient, but we at least know, from Buddha on to Christ, and then to Shankara and to Chaitanya, and now Sri Ramakrishna is on the scene in the 1800s with Swami Vivekananda and so forth. that generally 400 to 700 years a great soul like that has come in our history. Now, you might say that in the Kali Yuga, things get a little bit concentrated, you see. In a yuga where most people have heard of their true nature, and some of them have even realized it. Because in Sri Ram's time, when he was a young boy, and Lord Vashishta was teaching him, we heard that there were rishis all over the place in Sri Ram's time. There were so many lights. You could walk down the street and find illumined people. And actually, incidentally, that's why I take some of you to India, because India may be a very hard place to exist in. You might have a lot of pollution, a lot of poverty, and all these challenges. But almost every day you'll find something spiritual happening in India. Everywhere you go, you'll find an illumined soul, a person who's lit up. And when you compare that back here to your Western home, that hardly ever happens. You might go years without having anything special happen to you spiritually. You might go your whole lifetime without seeing an actual luminary. Because where are they in the West, you see? You're scientists, you're intellectuals. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about someone who has realized the inner terrain of their consciousness, has realized their Atman, their Buddha nature. And those are coming out of India and now Tibet and a few other places in droves, you see, and have been for hundreds of years. So that's very telling on our culture, but let's not go there right now. Let's give ourselves the benefit of the doubt and just say that you would go to India and you'd start to meet all sorts of souls who are lit up. Let's just call them that. Whether they're fully enlightened or not, or illumined, that gets into a lot of contention, but there's a lot of lit up souls there, and by being in their presence, you feel elevated. See, you feel like you've had darshan. Darshan is a Sanskrit word that means communion with God. So you can have communion with God formless. How many have had that? Gee, nobody raised their hand, you see. So, yeah, we know about the fakes, you know. The pretenders, you see. So, I'm saying, how many have had Nirvikalpa Samadhi? Okay, so now you get my point. So, Nirvikalpa Samadhi is your real formless communion, you see. And my point here is that never have you ever had it, see. And very few of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna had it. And I don't think any of the apostles of Jesus probably had it. We never heard of it. But you can have communion with God in form, you see. That's more common. That happens to you. You can get that even from your illumined preceptor. You can get that from going to India and meeting these great teachers, Roshis, Swamis, and maybe even some householder yogis are still there that you feel had, like our founder here in SRV. Lex Hickson was a very illumined person, we felt. And so this darshan then is very rare. So when God comes into a form, you see, then it gives you a chance to get close to something, and that gives you the inspiration to realize your true nature. So not just to speak about it anymore, but to actually realize it. Bring it full circle. Now, a little bit then about Advaita. It's there, your original soul, it's perfect, it's pure, and you're wanting to have communion with it. But you're going to need to have this non-dual samadhi in order to be absolutely sure of it. Otherwise it comes and goes with the gunas. Sometimes you feel like you've seen it, sometimes you feel like you haven't, and you're always having doubt. So doubt is one of the things that dies latest in spiritual life. An absolute rock-solid faith is what we want. Belief won't do it. You say, oh, I believe. Then you have a long way to go until you get shraddha, in faith. Shraddha in our tradition is based on knowing the difference between what's real and what's unreal, being able to detach from the unreal, and then getting peace of mind from that, and then having self-control, that is control of all these mechanisms, see. And then on top of that, you get forbearance of everything in the world that's problematic. You can easily forbear things. They say Forbearance is the default zone of the wise in the body. So the wise in the body, they still suffer like everyone else, see, but they can forbear it. So that's the default zone of the wise, called titiksha. It's, I think it's on here. So then from that you would get the ability to meditate on reality without any interruptions. And that's very rare. You'd get contentedness, and then you'd be able to meditate on reality without any interruptions. See? And then if you can have that, then they say you have faith. So that's like many very powerful steps to get faith. So that's how Vedanta would define its faith. If you're talking to a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or anyone else and they ask you what's your faith, then you're going to have to tell them faith in Vedanta is based upon viveka, vairagya, samadhamma, titiksha, uparati, samadhana, and shraddha. And then what do I get if I have that? I finally get mumukshutvam, a desire for freedom. See, after all that, you didn't get freedom. You got a true desire for freedom. That's how stiff the measure is. See, that's how high the bar is for getting even a desire for freedom. To call yourself free before you're free, and then you just return to your old self again, you see. You can dance and sing and get all high, you see. And then go the next day and Kundalini has come up and then it comes plummeting back down. You're not able to hold it, and you go and commit the same old acts again that you've always done and suffer the same old karmas. Then you can't call yourself enlightened. So the bar is very high and the measure is very stiff for that. Even for mumukshutvam, did I ever have a pure desire, a true desire for liberation? Or was I just thinking, maybe occasionally I had a taste of it, you see. I wish I could be free of all this. And then the gunas change. You go, this world's great. The next day, oh, everything's fine now. And then a week later, it's not fine again. So at least your forbearance is going to have to be there. You have to know that that's the way the world is, it's the way the body is, and you're in the body. So detaching yourself from the materialistic standpoint and all that is very difficult. And there it is right there, adibhuta, nature, prakriti. It would help if beings knew that nature came out of them, came out of the mind. But we don't know that. In fact, quite often, even in ancient India, Purusha and Prakriti were posed as two separate realities. And that was a problem for Vedanta. The Vedantists who came later, the luminaries came later, said, Samkhya is great. It's the best thing that ever happened to us. It's the foundation of everything with its 24 cosmic principles. It influenced Vedanta, it influenced Buddhism, it influenced Shaivism and Jainism and all others. But there's one problem with it. There's two realities in it. See? And if you had two realities, they would contradict each other. There's no such thing as two realities. There's got to be just one reality. So to call Purusha one thing and Prakriti a second thing, has a certain facility, but you're still a dualist, you see. Besides, Prakriti has then been shown up to be insentient. And that was a hard conclusion to come to. People want nature to be sentient so bad. They want nature to be real so bad. They want it to be unchanging so bad. And they don't want to give it up at the time of death. That's why they cling to the body. The body is nature. It's made out of 5 elements. When you say Prakriti in India, you're saying ether, air, fire, water, and earth. The 5 elements compounded into various forms. So there's nothing here on earth that isn't made of those 5 elements. If you were to look into the mind, as we were just saying, then you'll find out that there are some new ingredients there. There's, for instance, something called intelligence, or intellect, and consciousness. You see, these things start to introduce themselves to you. So now you begin to, if not prefer, begin to court your subtle body. It's what's called your subtle body. And you're not content with the physical body alone anymore. See, you know that that's where birth, life, and death take place. But ancestors are still there. you see, after all this time. We still have remembrance of the great souls. They're like icebergs that never melted in the ocean, where everything else, you know, got melted and brought back. But these great avatars, like the Adi Agya, the great sacrificers, they seem to persist from yuga to yuga. That's why Krishna can say, Yuge Yuge Cha Dharmasha, I come back from age to age, again and again. And he tells Arjuna early on in the Gita, Arjuna, we both had many lifetimes. I remember all of mine. You're not remembering any of yours right now. See, so these great souls have connected back to their subtle body. In their subtle body is this wonderful memory called Smriti Hetu. There's even words for it in Sanskrit. It means a subtle cause of memory. And by plugging into that in meditation, then they saw their line of births right back to Brahman. You see how they took on an ego and began to come down the spectrum of 24 cosmic principles right to the physical and congeal a body. And this is where you get the Tibetan Buddhist teachings of Bardos and Book of the Dead and all that, where they say the soul chooses its parents before it gets into the womb, see, before the fetus even forms. So there's an onlooking consciousness that's predicating its entire future existence, you see. And it's beginning to formulate that, and then it'll enter into it. So the idea of, rather than just being born in matter, now I am matter, I am the body, is offset in India by the fact that matter came out of me. So without going a lot deeper into that, it's the first thought that occurs to me when I think of Prakriti and Purusha as two separate realities. See, you could begin to connect one into the other, so there would be one reality if you would only come to know that nature came out of the mind. And so then nature was a thought in God's mind. See, air, earth, fire, water, and ether are thoughts in God's mind. What would you call earth in God's mind? The property of solidity. See, what would you call water? The property of liquidity, and so forth. So there's an idea that's very much akin to the Word. When Christ told John, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So in the beginning was the Word. So there is no beginning. Christ knew that. There's no such thing as a beginning. And Krishna points that out in the Gita several times. He says, beginnings, middles, and ends are all in Maya. You see, cycles are all in Maya. And Buddha realized that when he got into his nirvanic state and saw everything cycling. The river, he said, returns. That was one of his later teachings, how if you get out on the banks of the river, you'll see everything return, you see. But if you stay in the river, you'll never know. Everything's going around with you, and you'll never see the same thing, what's following you and what's ahead of you. So you got to get out on the banks of the river. So however which way you put it in Buddha's time, which was 550 years prior to Christ, and then 550 years later when Christ came, and Shankara another 600, 700 years later, and you've got this idea of these cycles and a witness that's looking on to them. So you might say then the soul is looking on to nature. Advaita, the original soul, always looks on and has a relationship with nature. The relationship becomes a problem when there's attachment. So I said, in order to have mumukshutvam, a desire for freedom, you're going to have knowledge of what's real and what's unreal. And then you're going to be able to have the power to detach from what's unreal. There are people who say, yes, I can see that Vedantic axiom, you see, Viveka and Vairagya. I can see how there's the unchanging and there's the changing. And then they leave it like that. So the unchanging still persists in them, see. It's still got its place. Well, isn't that pretty much what you're saying here? Nature is still persisting in the mind of the soul, as if it were a separate reality. And so my point here is that you're going to have to bring that together and know without a doubt that all of this came out of you. See what's the latest discovery in astronomy? What's that sun you see that it takes you 11 centuries to fly around in a jet. What's it called? Anyway, there's a whole bunch of suns of different sizes. You could fit like 120 of our size suns into that sun, and then that sun, 120 of those into another sun. But the point is that there's a sun so big out there that it'll take you 11 centuries, 1100 years, to fly around it in a jet, at jet speed, you see. That's how big that ball of fire is, up there in that infinite sky. So, what I'm saying is amazing, you see. Or let's go to Australia. Amazing. But much more amazing than that is that sun and all other huge suns out there just came out of you, came out of the soul. See? All of matter has come out of spirit. Everything has come out of Brahman. As it did, Brahman didn't change. You see, this was a, worlds of name and form were just a projection. You see, like light comes off of a sun, as they're saying. You see, so if you want the philosophical steps or underpinnings how to have this realization, and that's your Samkhya Yoga. The second chapter of the Gita is called Samkhya Yoga. All the enumerations that he gives you about, he called it back then the eightfold nature. See, there's mind, intellect, and ego, and then the five elements. And then you can throw the body in there because the body, deha, is part of the five elements too. So he says, this is my prakriti divided eightfold in the Gita. You get that very early on in the teaching. So, and he's reducing it down to simplicity for you. And you'll find in the Gita later on, he says, of all the great asterisms and of all the great mountains, I'm the Himalayas, and of all the great cows, I'm Kamatuk, and all. He says, he's the best of everything. He's the Adi Purusha of everything. But when he comes to sages, he says, of all the best sages, I am Kapila. See, so Kapila was the one that gave us this idea of Purusha Prakriti. Now, I could contend, and I would like to sometimes, that Kapila didn't really intend for you to think of two realities when he formed the Samkhya philosophy, that these two were somehow separate. That's just the way the graph is set up. There's Purusha and Prakriti. You have to do that in a way because out of Prakriti is going to come formless matter. And from formless matter, matter that's formed is going to occur, you see. We're missing that in our ideology, formless matter. Maybe black holes and all that, we're beginning to get at it, but they're keeping it at the physical level only. But formless matter is the seeds for everything that is here, you see. So you could say then everything that returns, it's a form. So everything that's physical will return to formless matter, and then it will come back into matter as formulation. But that's not you. That's not the Advaita. It doesn't go back to unmanifested Prakriti. Unmanifested Prakriti is in it. See what I mean? In your dreams tonight, you're forming everything out of unmanifested Prakriti from deep sleep. So you're forming objects out of deep sleep into dream, but you're the formulator of that. You're not a part of that. And so this is deep insight on the level of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, which Gaudapada and Govindapada, the incarnation of the father of yoga, and Shankara wanted everyone to know about, so that you'd make that connection between Purusha and Prakriti. So you'd connect the dots. See? And then you wouldn't be lost in nature anymore. They say if you know the 24 cosmic principles by heart and can meditate them and dissolve them, then you'll never be bound again in nature. It frees you to know this. You should be able to enumerate the 24 cosmic principles in your meditation and see how you formulated the worlds with them, and then dissolve them, because you're doing that every 24 hours anyway. Now you just have to become aware of it. You say awareness is one of the most slippery things, one of the most subtle things. You don't even know you have it. It's like fish in water saying, does water exist? Because they can't see it, right? So you're a soul full of consciousness, and consciousness is in you, and this is the foundation of everything, the underlying substratum, and you don't know about it yet? Because of the soul's penchant, to become attached to what it sees, feels, touches, hears, and smells only. And even when it is associated with the five elements, five senses, it can't even see that those senses were what gave way to the five elements. That ether gave way, that hearing gave way to ether. You're not going to have to physically hear unless you have some ether, you see, some space for vibration. And that touch gave way to, air. Touch gave way to air, you see. And that fire gave way to seeing, gave way to fire, you see. And tasting gave way to water. See? So the senses came first, and then the elements came afterwards. It's the opposite way, you see. Elements came first, the world got evolved, physics happened, everything got set up, and then the soul entered into it. Well, that's okay as a theory, but that's just on the physical plane that's happening. This little tempest in a teapot that's going on all the time in cycles. But when they say we should get up out of cycles, you're going to have to see how all these cycles have been witnessed by you. See, there is a consciousness that's looking on, a detached witness observer. And that's your first step to a transcendent mode, see. So there are ways in which you can practice this that have been given to you, called 24 cosmic principles. If you know them, you get free. And you won't come back into a birth, into a body next time, not knowing where you came from, or not knowing how to retrace your steps. See? The little breadcrumbs wouldn't have got picked away and pecked at by the problem of forgetfulness. See? Your smriti hetu, your subtle causal memory, would still be there. And in fact, there are people who are born here and they still remember their past lifetimes, like Sri Krishna, for instance, one of the earliest on record who remembered his whole train of lifetimes, all the way back to Vivasvat. He said, one of the early solar line, he could trace himself all the way back to that. That's where he got his wisdom from, he said. So that gets us into this idea of Adiyogi, the original sacrificer. There's these great souls. If there's these huge suns that are the granddaddy of all suns, you see, then there's these huge souls that are the Adi Purusha, the original souls of all souls. And they come to us sometime. They've mastered the prana. You see, this is Garuda bird. There are many stories of, like Narada walking up to Vishnu and saying, I want to know what Maya is. And Vishnu says, no, you don't. Don't ask. And he persists, so he puts him on Garuda bird and takes him into the realms of Maya. And Narada forgets himself in the realms of Maya, and after a lifetime, where he's completely forgotten his true nature, Vishnu shows up again and says, are you convinced now to give up Maya? See, you've totally forgot yourself there, right? And it seemed like, a whole lifetime had passed, but to Vishnu just a few seconds had passed. See? He just went into a trance. Maya is like a trance. And in that trance you can dream all sorts of things. Time is totally malleable. 1,000 years becomes a second. That's why these Mahayugas and these Manvantaras and so forth are just the one day in the lifetime of Lord Brahma, and another Manvantara is one night in the life of Lord Brahma. But thousands and thousands of beings have been born and died millions of times in that one night of Lord Brahma. So time is illusory that way and expandable, infinitely expandable. Now the only thing we haven't brought in there, Adiyagya, the original sacrificer, one of the nice things There's a beautiful song in India that says, Mother Kali is radiantly black. Down her radiant black form run streaks of blood, see, like crimson flowers floating on dark waters. See, this is the imagery in the song. See. And so what does it all mean? See, so she sacrifices for her children, and every time she sacrifices, then there's a cut. She runs with blood, and so forth. So the original sacrificer is always this great soul who's taking on the sufferings of all these other beings and helping them work them out. Because Krishna says in the Gita early on, I have no reason to come back to these worlds, Arjuna. I have nothing to gain here. Everything has been had by me and enjoyed, and a long time ago I have no desires left. I only come back for loka sangraha. That is for the highest good of these beings who are still caught up in nature. You see, they're still convinced that nature is real and their soul isn't. You see, so they're focused and fixated on nature. In yoga, that's called abhinavesha, clinging to life, or fear of death. There is no such thing as middles, beginnings, and ends, we said. So then there would be no such thing as birth, life, and death either. There would just be a continuum of consciousness. And the souls that realize that self lift themselves up and enjoy eternal life. They can have as many bodies as they want, Krishna says in the Gita. They can put on bodies like a child outgrows clothes when it gets bigger. Next set of clothes, next set of clothes. And otherwise, they think they're a new body every time. See, and they have the same experiences every time, based on their karmas and their samskaras. They'll go to school again and get another degree, see. And they'll be a doctor again, or a lawyer again, or whatever, and they'll just relive the same lifetime many times. And when will come that time, you see, when they can awaken their spirituality, their inner spirituality, and get original, see, adi, original. When will everything become original for me, see? My soul's original nature, original sacrificer, and then there's this adhyatma, Brahman's presence in it all. That's the fourth of the fourfold teachings. I'm using this as a sort of underlying philosophical tenet of the Gita, because it's called, an Upanishad. Even Krishna calls it an Upanishad. At the end of every chapter he says, in the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishad, the discourse between the beloved Lord Sri Krishna and his devotee Arjuna, this is called the 13th discourse called, so forth and so on. So he always calls it an Upanishad. Upanishads are basically known for their non-duality. See? So the Gita has this non-dual thread running through it. Krishna even mentions it as the thread running through the pearls of the necklace, you see. Everyone likes the pearls, that is God's external body, if you want to put it that way, but nobody sees the thread, you see, adhyatma. So Adidaivaita is the original soul, transmigrating all the time with its fixation on nature, never knowing its true nature. So it needs to get help from God in form, Ishvara. It's called Adiyaga, the original sacrificer, will come and help awaken you to your true nature and lift you out of darkness, see. But the whole thing, sacrificer, the one who's seeking freedom, and the underlying substratum of nature in its manifested and its unmanifested form is resting on Brahman. This is the underlying substratum of all substratums. It even underlies formless matter. And that's one thing we don't understand in the West. You see, formless matter is a new discovery to us. And so we get excited about that. But the seers have always gotten excited, or maybe their excitements have come to an end, when they reached Brahman and realized it, and knew that formlessness, with a capital F, was the ultimate reality. So Krishna says that in the Gita. I have my manifested nature eightfold. That is, mind, ego, intelligence, and the 5 elements. Then I have my unmanifested nature called mind. See, that is unmanifested Prakriti, and all that the seeds out of which all of that came. But then I stand supreme above those two, my triple nature, and I am the ultimate, supremely unmanifested, you see, and that would be Brahman. So, I am the author of the Vedanta, he says. And the Vedanta is all about Upanishads, and the Upanishads are all about Brahman. So that's how you could bring India's philosophy in many of its main aspects, at least, into the Gita, you see, and show a sort of underlying foundation for that. If you read the Mahabharata, you'll get some of the story about how all of this led up to the Kurukshetra battle and what happened afterwards, and the end of an age and so forth. Krishna bringing Shiva bringing an end to the old age. So, but in the Gita itself, people tend to focus on what's going to happen next, but then they see this constant presence of the Supreme Sacrificer, and always talking about Brahman. It all seems to be happening in nature, you see, with elephants and weapons and eventually rivers of blood. See? But the Lord looking on is taking these rivers of blood and drinking them, you see. And elephants and chariots and everything are just disappearing into these millions of mouths that Arjuna sees when he gets the cosmic vision. It's a beautiful chapter there. I think I even have it with me. I have done my own translation of that chapter, put it into English. So, again, a philosophical underpinning of what the Gita is based upon, based on that simple but very profound question that Arjuna asked him, and Sri Krishna's answer. So, there are some other teachings here that are strewed around that are connected to this, and maybe bring out some more of the facets, but I see we've run out of time because we had a little late start. So we will go into our 15-minute break here, come back and take up some of these other teachings to kick us off towards these immortal points of the Dharma. Some 32 of them that he mentions in chapter 8 and 9 that this came out of. So here we will take our break. Thank you for your kind attentions, and we will be back in about 15 minutes. Welcome back to our full second half. Our first half was a little truncated because of technical difficulties, so we hope you on the live streaming stayed with us those 15 minutes while we were trying to initiate the taping. These are all being rendered into YouTube videos, all these classes, and SRV site has a lot of them. Our website has a lot of them already you can look into. In fact, I just finished viewing and preparing the last 3 of the Shakta Advaita Vada in the last 3 days. Remember that course we did last year? There were some 11 classes in that series, so that's going to be all up new. So we're always adding these new ones too, and then this Gita would probably become a series for YouTube, after it's completed and concluded. So we're always adding these teachings of the Dharma in for Western, particularly Western peoples, so that they can imbibe this and grow in it, because morality and ethics, we reached a certain level of that, but the Dharma was difficult for us and was not being given to us by our parents like it is in India to the children there. It has been for so long. So now we have to look for teachings and maybe even teachers that come produce a few ourselves here in the West, like in the case of our founder Lex Hickson, and be able to hand this Dharma out and contemplate it. It's so important for spirituality and for sadhana to have a well-oriented spiritual practice going that defeats all these problems, like Arjuna's Vishada, his depression, can be offset by the Dharma. Everything can be offset by the Dharma. You just immerse your mind in it and contemplate it all the time, and pretty soon you'll never know what boredom or depression or any of those things is anymore. You'll just always be taken up with that upward moving prana. You see, that takes the mind towards higher heights, like the heights of a Garuda, always taking you into these heights of non-dual awareness, hopefully, eventually. So we looked at the fourfold presence. Now these other Gita teachings that are here that connect with it are also very good. In the Gita he talks about, that is, Sri Krishna talks about the 3 ways of clear seeing. First is perceiving reality in the dying and the undying. He mentions this to Arjuna, that same-sidedness. He's talking about equanimity, or sthiti pragnasya. This is a nice word in Sanskrit that he uses. Steady, sthiti pragnasya, wisdom. So a man or a woman, the soul of steady wisdom, is always seeing reality the same in the dying and the undying. So that would be a good practice for people. I know a lot of people right now, or I know a lot of people over the past year and two, and some people right now who are waiting on their elder fathers and mothers to pass. So this transition of death is coming to their family, and so it brings people together and also causes them to wonder about it as they witness the passing of older people into their bodies, into unmanifested prakriti, but their souls are not passing. Their souls are constant. Those are the 2 lessons to get out of that when you watch a person passing from the body, is that their soul was never born, so it cannot die, number 1. And number 2, the body and the elements are just returning to unmanifested prakriti, formlessness of matter, and then coming back into formed matter as you require it. In other words, you're the one that's going to predicate or dictate when your next body comes, and when you want to identify with it or associate with it would be better. And so any passage of time, Holy Mother used to say, most souls, maybe 100 years in a formless state, and then we'll come back and take a body again. So other souls, they might come back right away for some important work to take up the thread of their yoga. Other souls might sleep indefinitely in a kind of bardo. So there are different ways in which different souls go about this transmigration process. So here's the 4 transmigrations here. Bhutas, physical beings, Pitrus, ancestors, Devas, gods and goddesses, and Ishvara, the supreme form, these are the four kinds of transmutations that are going on. Even Ishvara has a transmigration going on. Though Ishvara will be itself for many yugas, Mahayugas maybe, and then that soul will dissolve into Brahman, and another soul will take its place and act as Ishvara. So there's even a kind of transmigration going on in terms of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and the Trinity and so forth. And they're one day and one night are these yugas. So they live these incredibly long periods of time, overseeing these worlds of name and form, from causal to subtle to gross and back again. They see this flow all the time. So if you're seeing that kind of transmigration going on, then you should step back with it and be aware, as he says to Arjuna. Perceive that same reality in the dying and the undying. He also wants you to perceive the supreme goal above it all. So the supreme goal would be to reach a state like that. Further, perceive all actions done by nature while the soul remains actionless. We talked about that at our retreat. Remember, just last weekend we had a very good retreat here on making crucial spiritual connections. And some of the mainland students came and we all got together and at a beautiful place here on the Big Island and went through 3 days of teachings. And part of the teachings that came out was this idea about how the Purusha, or the Atman, is activeless, and all actions are taking place in nature. So you may feel that you're acting, see, but that's your intellect, your mind, your ego, your thoughts, your body, and your senses are all made of nature. And so they're acting. See, apparently so. They're going through these 24-hour periods of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. But you should know, he says, that your soul is inactive all the time. It's always the observer of these events. Quite often the most effective way of saying that is phenomena. There's this constant phenomena going on. And and that's a dance of the phenomena. But you're the nomenon. So you're the one that's watching the phenomena come and go. And the more that sinks into your understanding, the more you feel peaceful, the more you feel blissful, the more you feel stationary, the more you feel yourself, your true nature. So these 3 ways of clear seeing are a teaching he gives. Quite often the teachings in these charts are brought out and highlighted because they might go by you as you read the Gita or any other scripture. Some of these things might go by as lowlights, but you want them highlighted and brought out, and they're more important. So these 4 transmigrations and these 3 ways of clear seeing are important in the context of the Gita. Also here, how to get into divine union with the Lord, and this would of course be in the body, while you're in the body, apparently so. And then the 5 offerings to the Lord too. Those are 2 very good teachings that come out. The 5 criterion for divine union are engage in divine works. So you want to follow the laws of karma yoga. We had that teaching recently. And you want to try and strive for divine vision. That is, ecstasies and visions are not the essence of spiritual life. Building character is the essence of spiritual life. But these visions will accompany that kind of building of character, and they'll be sort of road signs or markers along the way that will allow you to know you're getting closer and closer to your true nature, or farther and farther away, as the case may be. And sometimes this is predicated on grace too. A lot of great souls have said, I remember Swami Brahmananda said once, well, I wasn't feeling particularly spiritually these days, a little dry, and all of a sudden I went to a temple, and I was in a temple, and around this hallway came this divine light and just washed over me, and I was in bliss for 3 days. So you never know when that kind of experiences is headed your way. So that's why you always remain on vigil, and probably saying that when these tamasic periods hit you, or these dry periods hit you, that's the real testing ground. It's sort of like putting it in terms of meditation. So I didn't have a good meditation today, I always say, great. They say, I had a good meditation, I say, oh, all right. Because when you persevere in a meditation and it's not very high, it usually means you're burning out karmas. And if you persevere through that, then you'll build subtle muscles, that's the inside in meditation, that will allow you to stay for long periods of time. Hour a day, 2 hours a day, on retreat, go to Zazen or something, 8 hours a day. But what's a good long meditation? 40 days. That was how long Christ was in the wilderness. 49 days was how long Buddha was under the Bo tree. There were some 40 days and 40 nights associated with Moses and also with Muhammad. So you have these periods of taking yourself to task in maybe once a lifetime. They might come to you. You feel ready for it. You feel strong. Retreats are just suggestions of that. You see, I may kind of cut my teeth on this 3-day or 7-day retreat, but eventually I'm going to want to do the great austerity. So I have to do it once in my lifetime. At least this is the way these souls who want to perfect themselves, you see. No doubt the self, with a capital S, is already perfect, but the lower self is not. And it's also always subject to these incrustations I was talking about. If you're a highly advanced soul and these incrustations come to the mind, you can work around them, no doubt. They're not going to really affect you, but there's always a risk, and you always have to remain on vigil. So you'll feel very sattvic for a time, and all of a sudden that period will pass, and that's not your fault. See, these gunas are coming around in cycles all the time for everyone. Otherwise there wouldn't be a dark night of the soul for Jesus, you see. Or a Buddha meeting Mara under the Bo tree in those long meditations, you see. And that is the devil, the devilish thing, you see. So everyone has these cycles of gunas coming back on them. It's just the nature of the world. If you know the nature of the world to be mixed, and not all good and not all bad, as Vivekananda said, then you'll be much more able to withstand these cycles when they attend upon you. I know people who have gone through like several year dark cycles. I've seen it happen, and even amongst my students, and then they come out of it a couple of years later and everything is all right again. So whether it be karmas or samskaras or the cycles of natural cycles of nature and life in the body and so forth, or a combination of all the above, it does occur. And so to be on vigil, would be to be aware of these kinds of things. You'd be engaging in divine works, have divine vision, divine devotion, divine detachment, and divine love. This is like a kind of a riot act against anything that would attempt to take away your higher consciousness. See, this is what you're going to want to use as your sort of spiritual menu. Okay? Now, make them all offerings. These divine acts, offer them all to the Lord. Anything you consume, he says, consume it in the name of the Lord. So that would be any kind of food. Remember, when we talk about food, we're not talking about just prasad. That is not just physical prasad, but there are 4 other kinds of prasads, you see, that you can digest. I even brought a chart on it that I can show you if we get to it today. These different kinds of prasads. Clarity of food, clarity of mind, clarity of mood, and clarity of spirit. Adhyatma prasad. Is that adhyatma word again? See? So these kinds of foods are physical, vital, mental, intellectual, and those you want to make offerings to. That's why if you're doing the 5 sacrifices we mentioned, one of them's to the rishis, right? So doesn't the sacrifice to the rishis go straight across with taking in wisdom, you see, as prasad, wisdom prasad, and and then acknowledging it as coming from the rishis. See, so in India, all these great souls, Ram and Krishna and Vasishta and Buddha and Chaitanya and Shankara and Vivekananda, forward and back, if any one of them ever came up with any new, so-called new system or way of putting a darshan of the past, they'd always make sure not to put their name on it. You see, because they always acknowledge the rishis of the past. See, I got all my wisdom from my teacher, from my guru. See, and so in that way they keep that all pure. They offer everything to the Lord, and that includes the wisdom that they are able to realize and glean from the scriptures, say. So anything you consume, think of it, as not just the body is consuming, but the mind is consuming too. There's a great hunger everywhere, and you want to try and fulfill it. And that's only going to be done in the Dharma. Sacrifices, we looked at that, including the supreme sacrificer, but of course you have your own kinds of sacrifices that you do for family and friends and ancestors and all that. You want to make sure those are conscious. Gifts, in chapter 18, 17 and 18 of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna about the 3 different kinds of gifts that people offer, and 2 of them are not right timing and are not done with the right intention. See, so always have to be very careful about giving gifts. In India, of course, one of the very main yamas that you practice in yoga is called a parigraha. You don't give or receive gifts. They didn't give and receive gifts back in the time. See, they were very, very careful about that. Not only because there were no strings attached, but because if they were involved in giving and receiving, they forgot their true nature. Patanjali brought that teaching out. He said whenever a person is involved in commerce, then they tend to forget their Atman, forget their true nature. And if they forget it in that lifetime, they'll forget it in the next. They'll be born in ignorance. So engaging in commerce, we'd call it business nowadays, causes you to forget your divine nature and to be born again in forgetfulness. That's why you don't give and receive gifts in India. Not just because, there's strings attached. There's some level of teaching to that. You have to be very careful when and why and to who and so forth you give it. But the real teaching is that engaging in constant with materials and matter all the time causes you to stop thinking about spirit. Matter, spirit, right? Prakriti, Purusha, unreal, real. Eternal, non-eternal, changing, unchanging. However way you want to put it, you run that into your mind so that your gifts are going to be very well considered if you give or receive at all. Now, you know what a monk is like. I told you the story before. I sometimes see people give gifts to my teacher, my Swami Sheshanandaji. In Portland, Oregon, we were there. And he'd look at him, and kind of, walk away with him. But then I happened to look in his room one day, and he had almost nothing in his room but a cot. And there was a fireplace there, too, that was never used. And he'd just thrown all the gifts in the fireplace. There was just like a snowbank of gifts coming out of the fireplace. So he never received them. Occasionally you'd see 1 or 2 of them might have been open just to see, what did this fool give me? Oh, that sounds like him. You see. That he would have given me that. Toss it after you saw where the person was coming from. But Americans will say, "Oh, I'll give my Swami a gift." Won't he be happy? No, they're monks. They don't receive and give. They don't own. They don't possess. They don't want. So you find this out about a teacher if you've apprenticed a monk after a while, and teaches you a lesson, especially if you're a Westerner living in materialism all the time with it all around you, and people are giving, and look at the kings and queens of Europe, how involved they were in lands and wealth and so forth. Our whole Western culture is steeped in that kind of giving and receiving, and loving and hating and gifting and taking away, and betraying and murdering and everything else that went with it in this materialistic world. So that people value that more than their Atman, or more than their true spirit. Of course, it's very telling on the society, on the culture. And finally, to check it all would be your austerities. Make sure that you do austerities. These are yogic in practice, you see. That's called tapas, austerities. It's one of the niyamas. So you have aparigraha, non-giving of gifts, and tapas. One's a yama, one's a niyama, and there are 5 of each in yoga. It's the first 2 limbs, right? And probably before you go on to asana, you should have mastered these first 2 limbs before you even sat like this. So you would have studied your scriptures, swadhyaya, you would have done austerity, tapas, you would have worshipped the Lord, Ishvara, pranidhana, you would have been very careful about giving and receiving, aparigraha, and truthful satyam, and ahimsa, peaceful. You wouldn't have committed any violence against anything. That's why these sacrifices are important, to all these beings. Is you want to make sure that you don't commit any violence against beings. Not only because it accrues karma, because it's of course detrimental to spiritual life in the world. So tapas, austerities, are very important. You want to take, like we were just saying, 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness might be a good tapas, you see, for a great soul. But Krishna used to say, for the householders, they need to go on retreat a couple times a year. Get away from family, and get away from children, and get away from work, because these works are supposed to be divine, right? And if you don't keep holy company, how can your works continue to be divine? You start to get very mundane, fall into conventional rounds of work, 9 to 5 they call it. Well, now 9 to 5 has become 24/7, I think. People just work themselves ragged. And for what? For the same old things. And that's not the worst problem. The worst problem is that your true nature is getting obscured more and more as you take your attention off of it and put it on other things that are not so worthy of your attention, that cause you to lose your peace and your contentment and your natural happiness for this feigned kind of happiness that you accepted. So those are some addendums to this chart. Not a lot you can put on an 8 by 11, but if I were to look into the Gita and look at a very important part of that discourse of Krishna's, I would say this would be it. Now, let's just recap it there in a quote from Sri Krishna. The imperishable is Brahman, the Supreme. Its dwelling in individual bodies is termed Adhyatma, Brahman's presence in everything. Adibhuta pertains to perishable nature, here. And the Purusha is the Adidaivata. That's your soul, with a capital S. And I, Ishvara, am the soul sacrificer, the Adiyagya. So that's his quick question to Arjuna's, answer to Arjuna's question. What is Adidaivata? What is Adiyagya? What is Adibhuta? What is Adiyatma? See, and this is how he comes back right away and answers him. See, so he's got not only a profound realized soul there, he's got an avatar in human form. Will answer him in no uncertain questions and remove all his doubts in a thrice. Now, I just said how you put your mind upon divine things and take it off of the world and so forth, and steep your mind in the Dharma, and you begin to lose all these problems that are attending you all the time. Well, the Gita is just enacting that in 18 chapters. That's why the first chapter is Arjuna's dejection, or Vishada. And then by the end, he's gone through all these teachings. The whole march of 18 chapters is, which my teacher used to recite to us by memory, in Sanskrit and English, is just this reading of how to pull the mind out of Maya. people have said different things about the Gita, what its meaning is. But Sri Ramakrishna, they asked finally Sri Ramakrishna, what is the meaning of the Gita? People have said it's about war and peace, and others have said it's about Ishvara, and others have said it's this and that. What is the real meaning of it? And Sri Ramakrishna said it's what you get when you say Gita, 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 Gita again and again. It turns into Tyagi, Tagi, 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 Tagi. Gita, 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 Gita. So Tagi means renunciation. Means renounce the world. That's the message of the Gita. You might as well say it's the message of India. Just renounce the world. And no country and no group of individuals and souls has ever been so blatant about it, so straightforward about it. And Buddhism was a natural outcome of it in 550 AD. I'm sorry, BC. Buddhism was extremely renunciate and very, very transcendental in its approaches. So it's not going to be a popular message among people who are living in opulence, matter, and don't like that. I mean, look at the Kaurava clan. That's what they're doing. They're living in opulence in the Pandavas. What belongs to the Pandavas they've taken. So you look into the Upanishads, Ishavasya Upanishad, first or second sloka. See, do not covet the goods of other beings. Do not covet the goods of other beings. So, you enjoy, you take away from others what is theirs. You see, so taking and giving, you see, is a totally different dynamic, isn't it? We should be giving everything to others all the time, and it's one of the problems of what they call democracy, and it's one of the problems of what they call politics and all of that. See, is that we divide these countries into borders, and then each country is for its own, and it doesn't help the other country. See, but they break down all those barriers and just be one human race is the idea. See, and based upon this idea of one soul and its relationship with nature, then you create a dharmic dynamic like they had in India in the Satya Yuga. And out of those kinds of yugas come these great teachings, you see. Great things can come out of that. So, patriotism, not much for it, because I don't see any difference in other countries and myself. I want to break down these borders and have one religion called Vedanta. That's what Vedanta is best for. Is illustrating the oneness of existence, and then we have to follow through and live like that. So to kick off then the introduction for Gita study, this would be it. And I'd say there are other ways in which you could do it, and I have used other texts, but this is a very good, not only set of axioms and principles, but a very good image with which to see that. Nature behind it all is the scene. Brahman is the scene, and then the soul in nature, the prayer to Ishvara to come and free, renounce the world, free the soul from this, and the underlying presence in it all sort of takes you beyond the idea of practice, you see, because you have to practice to purify the mind, but you don't have to practice to purify yourself. Yourself's always pure. And this is the kind of two things you have to keep together when you do engage in the practice. I'm doing this sadhana to purify my mind so that it can always remain in divine vision, you see, of its true nature. Otherwise, these incrustations can form. See, and then I'll begin to run afoul of everything, myself, nature, and all other things. At the same time, I have to say, that sadhana isn't going to change me in a bit. My true nature is pure and perfect at all times. Sadanga not tunaiva shudam, guru pradesham not tunaiva shudam, mana vinasha not tunaiva shudam. is how the Advaita Gita puts it. See, I was looking and came upon this at the break, which I didn't know I had, but popped out at me. That one attains to the Supreme Self who perceives the entire universe filled with myriad forms and innumerable objects, both moving and unmoving, as emerging, merging, and submerging into one's very own being, like millions of tiny bubbles formed and dissolved in primal waters. So, isn't that what we were saying earlier, that all of nature has come out of you? So, one attains to the Supreme Self who sees that everything has come out of the mind and is taken back into the mind, just like bubbles coming in primal waters. We see them dissolving there and coming back all the time. So that would be a way of saying it. Or you could say it musically, as far as Ishvar is concerned, when you sing Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram Jaya Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram Sita Ram Jaya Sita Ram Bhaj Pyare Tu Sita Ram Ishvara Allah Tero Naam Sabko Sanmati De Bhagavan Ishvara Allah Tero Naam Sabko Sanmati De Bhagavan Jaya Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram. So the savior of the fallen and the lowly, savior of all beings, is this Adiyagya, in this song called Ram or Ramchandra. And controller of the mind and the